All right, so we're in the book of Matthew, and while Sarah's getting her phone, I just want to review, that, with Matthew, he'll have there are these passages, longer passages of where Jesus does a lot of teaching, and we just came out of 16 and 17, where there's, a lot of stories about more theological kind of stuff. And with chapter 18, the shift is into more relationships and interactions with other people. So Barclay and Sarah reviewed this at the end of last week. That these in
this David.
Hey, woo, we're really raking them in today.
And Claire will not be with us because she was up last night with Baxter, who was sick again.
Oh goodness. Okay.
Oh, no.
All right. Good morning, Cindy and David.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so chapter 18 in Matthew, that among some of the main qualities or values that are taught in this chapter that Barclay points out or highlights is humility, responsibility, self-renunciation, individual care, discipline, fellowship, and a spirit of forgiveness are core values in this chapter. So, all right, so staying with our routine. Sarah, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, page 203, chapter 18, verses 1 through 4.
On that day, the disciples came to Jesus. Who then, they said, is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus called a little child and made him stand in the middle of them and said, this is the truth I tell you, unless you turn and become as children, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself as this little child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.
All right, so who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Sort of the age-old question. And the disciples, we sort of beat up on them, but we have to remember this was all new territory for them. So trying to figure out how this new, how this kingdom is working, how this works, how this new covenant is working, and learning who Jesus is. This is an ongoing learning process. We're still figuring it out teel. And we
grew up with it.
Yeah, we grew up with it, and we've got 2,000 years of history to help us sort it out. So I
really don't care who's the greatest as long as I can get through the door.
Whoa,
just
all
let
right.
me in.
All right, well, chapter 18 is going to lay some stuff out for us. All right. So so Jesus says that the truth is, unless you turn, as Barclay translates it, unless you turn. My other Bible, the New Jerusalem, translates it, unless you change. So unless you turn or unless you change to become as children. All right. So it's a question that all of us in life are aiming at. How, like Nancy said, I just want to get in there. All right. So there was a child there that Barclay translated as saying that he called a little child and made him stand in the middle of them. And not all translations are quite that direct. The other one says, so he called a little child to them who he set among them. So, which sounds to me a little gentler. But anyhow, so needless to say, there are traditions about who that child may have been that Barclay refers to. One is speculation. We know there's a couple of points in Matthew 8 and then 1 Corinthians 9 where it refers to Peter as being married. So he may very well have had children. And so it may have been his child that was there. there's another tradition. I don't know if y'all ever remember hearing of Ignatius of Antioch. And Ignatius may have been a baby at this time. I mean, he was one of the early leaders in the Christian church, dying in the early 100s. So assuming he was martyred, so there's some, tradition of thought that it may have been Ignatius. Who knows? So
Was he in our book?
in the God Seekers book, he may have been, because I don't know. I can't remember.
Stuart's got my book, so I can't run and look at it.
Sorry about that.
But Ignatius, he'd written a series of letters, and so his letters are thought to provide insight into the thinking that, sort of different thoughts in the early church, to give early insight into the church. So, all right, so so as far as what this story brings out for us, the child's quality of humility that Barclay highlights, the child's dependence, that they're dependent on other folks to take care of them, to love them. And Barclay makes the point that if men and women would accept the fact of their dependence on God, a new strength and a new peace would enter their lives. And then the quality of trust, that children are by instinct trusting. And so trusting parents to meet their needs. And so if we have that similar kind of trust in God, what would that mean for us?
I wouldn't have needed to preach my depression sermon. That's what it means.
I think a interesting characteristic of children is they're more capable of learning and learning quickly. The older you get, the more difficult it is to learn new things.
And to accept new things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yesterday at when I was working at the quilt shop, Dana Hatton and her mom came in, because it turns out her mom was here visiting, and her mom is quite a sewer. And so we didn't recognize each other for quite a while because of the mask. But anyhow, so Dana was telling me story about Parker, her grandson Parker, who I think is just one of the cutest kids on the face of the earth. Sorry, there's lots of cute kids, but Parker just is really cute. Anyhow, Parker got to go to Vacation Bible School this year. And she was telling me about just what a wonderful experience it was for him. And to the point that he was getting up to go to daycare one day, and he was like, I'd rather go to Vacation Bible School. There I get to learn about God. I really would rather go to Vacation Bible School. So her telling me that story yesterday was just such a nice illustrates this passage, I think, really well. And what you were just saying.
Kids will believe,
Sarah, no.
Oh, he's not in God Seekers? Oh, okay. Who's the first one in God Seekers?
Origin.
Oh boy. I can't pronounce it. Irenaeus.
Oh, Irenaeus.
Yeah, Iranian. Yeah. Okay, Susan, you were getting ready to say something.
I said, well, I was thinking, children, you tell them something and they believe it very often. They're always asking questions, but they usually believe, what you tell them. I mean, look at all the stories that you read children, and, they don't have any trouble with a donkey talking, or, ducks communicating with sheep, or whatever, they believe anything.
Sounds like listening to the news to me.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. All right. What about the quality of humility? What could that say to us at this point? What could we take from that for ourselves? They're not wishing for prominence.
Maybe that was a comment he was making to the disciples for asking who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God in the first place. You know, you have to have some humility here. You know, it's, am I going to be on the right hand or am I going to be on the left hand?
Right, because remember we've just had the transfiguration, you know, not too long ago in Matthew. So, yep. So lots of illustration of that. All right, let's look at the next several verses. And for Barclay, this is another one of those times where he kind of reorganizes the verses, you know, so it's going to be verses 5 through 7 and then verse 10. So Susan, you want to read that?
Yes. Whoever receives one such little child in my name receives me, but whoever puts a stumbling block in the way of one of these little ones who believes in me, it is better for him that a great millstone should be hanged around his neck and that he should be drowned far out in the open sea. Alas for the world because of stumbling blocks. Stumbling blocks are bound to come, but alas for any man by whom the stumbling block comes. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you, their angels in heaven always look upon the face of my Father who is in heaven.
Whew.
I don't remember stumbling blocks in the original. In
other translations?
Other translations.
Yeah. The New Jerusalem translates stumbling blocks at one point as causes of falling.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't look up the NRSV, see how that translates it. So we really, you know, when I read this, I really feel that shift in tone. So this one's.
Oh, we're getting a note from our co-ministers, Kathy. The Greek there is, well, yeah.
Scandalize.
Same
Mine
word.
has temptation.
What'd you say, Brittany?
Is scandalized, the same root as our, oh, yeah, okay.
Translation has temptation or temptations. Not,
Yeah, that's what NRSV has temptations.
Yeah, I'd be okay with putting a millstone around drug dealers' necks and putting them out in the ocean.
tell me how you really feel.
Could we do that to Florida's governor?
Yeah, this, you know, we go from sort of the innocence and humility of children to, you know, putting millstones around people's necks and throwing them in the ocean. And Barclay gives some background about that, as far as that for the Jews, drowning was not typically a Jewish punishment. That was not part of their tradition. But it was, when it happened, it was considered to be a symbol of utter destruction to do that. And that, in fact, when the rabbis taught that pagan and Gentile objects were to be utterly destroyed, they said they must be cast into the salt sea to utterly destroy the pagan and Gentile objects. So I think Barclay shares that with us to share the importance of Jesus' teachings about this. So when Jesus says in verse 5, whoever receives one such little child in my name, what is that? Looking at the meaning of in my name, that Barclay says it can mean for my sake, that the care of children is something that's carried out for the sake of none other than Jesus Christ. So it could also mean with a blessing. It could mean that receiving the child and, as it were, naming the name of Jesus over that child that anyone who brings Jesus and the blessing of Jesus to a child is doing a Christ-like work. And then to receive a child can mean not so much to receive a child as to receive a person who has childlike quality of humility. So getting into the analogy of this, and the People's Commentary talks more about this aspect of this passage than Barclay does. That to receive a child can also mean simply just to welcome a child, to give the child the care and love and teaching that's required. And it can mean also to see Christ in the child. I really like that, that for us to be, that we're being called to see Christ in the child. So
Maybe we're being called to be Christ for the child.
And maybe we are all we're all children of God. So
Right.
we're all children.
Right.
Yeah, I read this passage as being more about the receiver, not the child.
Mm-hmm.
This is more about the person who is receiving and sees the childlike character in someone or whatever. It's how you're supposed to act. Okay, not so much how the child is supposed to act. I think that's how I'm interpreting it.
I think
Right.
that's what I was trying to say when I
Yeah.
said be Christ for the
Yeah.
child. I think it's one thing to just put the words out, bless you in the name of Jesus or something, but another thing to, I'm not sure how to say it, but you're extending your love, you're extending your protection,
Yeah, protection and teachings.
right.
Well, and it's also comparing that with don't be a stumbling block or don't be something that gives temptation to a child of God. That doing that, and we've heard about that and read about that in previous chapters, where it's one of the gravest sins to be someone who would put some kind of a stumbling block or temptation in front of a child of God.
Mhm. Mhm.
This passage always reminds me of the Christmas story, The Visitor, where the little kid comes and the man takes care of her and comforts her and gets her home. I always flash on that story whenever I hear this passage.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, Craddock and Boring, and they, the point that they make in their commentary on this passage is the responsibility that rests in us as Christians, that, like you were saying, Bernie, and each of you, that we're called to make a change in us. That responsibility for us to exemplify the best of qualities of the children in our relationships with each other and with God, I think. So, but Barclay goes on for quite some time about not being the stumbling block, and how awful it is, as we mentioned a minute ago, about being a stumbling block for children and other people in becoming Christians. And he talks about the millstone, that at that time most households had millstones, that it was part of the women's job to grind the grain, and so it would be two stones that would turn with each other, so that a woman could handle it independently. So those millstones were pretty common in those days in people's households as well.
Gosh, that's a gadget I don't have.
You have a
I'll
grinder?
have one for Christmas.
Well, we
You
can.
have a grinder, Sarah, for herbs?
Yeah, actually I do, yeah, but it's not a millstone.
It's not two stones, sir.
As far as children go, and stumbling blocks, I keep flashing on the crime of commission versus crime of omission, and in failing to provide religious instruction for children, are we not stumbling blocks? I mean, I've often said, parents, are very anxious about making sure their children can, dance ballet and play the violin, but they never see the inside of a church. And that's very concerning.
Yeah.
I think there is a trend, though, at least among the people that I know. A lot of people are sending their children to private Christian schools because they feel like that's what they need. And what a difference when they compare them to their experience in public schools. The Vacation Bible School is so great, but it's 1 week out of 52.
Right. Yeah, it's been very sad for me to see the trend in churches, not just our own, but many, where Sunday school has just gone by the wayside.
Well, when
people-
if I compare it when I was young, though, the most important thing my mom and dad shared with me was I knew they loved me. And everything that they did showed that they loved me. And yeah, I didn't go to church all the time. I mean, we went to church, but I never enjoyed church or Sunday school. It was kind of cliquish, and all the kids there were not that very accepting. I didn't feel welcome there. And so it wasn't until, Bud and I were much older and when we were married that we sought a church, but we had known love, and we had heard about, God. It's not that God wasn't a part of our home or our celebrations, but it wasn't really all of my search for God wasn't based on my experience with church when I was young.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and mine was sort of a combination. We didn't start going to church until I was about 8 years old. So,
And church was the first place I went after I went home from the hospital being. My grandfather was a trustee. My grandparents on both sides, aunts, uncles, and cousins were all charter members of the church that I went to the first 10 years of my life.
Why weren't you born in church?
but I didn't have a birthing room at the church. Oh.
If they had, my mother would have used it.
I got myself healed at a very early age going to church, being a Catholic.
Yeah.
Every Sunday.
Oh.
With me, it was Sunday morning, Sunday night, and if Daddy wasn't working shift work, Wednesday night. I was Baptist.
Yeah. Oh. All right. So I want to go back and look at verse 10. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you, their angels in heaven always look upon the face of my Father who is in heaven. All right. So where Barclay translates despise, most other translations say look down on. So do not look down on one of these little ones. For I tell you, their angels in heaven always look upon the face of their Father who is in heaven. So when it talks about their angels in heaven always look upon the face of my Father, what does that say to you?
Could you spell the there? Is it THEIR or THEY''RE? What do we? Give me a word.
THEIR.
Okay, so
The
talking about
angels.
their angels, meaning
Yeah.
the angels of the little children. Okay, gotcha.
Right. So Barclay talks about how in Jewish thought at that time, angels had a pretty highly developed angelology, as he says, that every nation had its angel, every natural force, such as the wind and the thunder and the lightning and the rain, had its angel. They even went to the lengths of saying very beautifully that every blade of grass had its angel. And so they believed that every child had a guardian angel.
So whereas the American Indian thought of clouds and things as thunder gods and whatever, Christians thought it was thunder angel.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 So Barclay goes on to say that that angels behold the face of God in heaven, that these angels beholding the face of God in heaven means that they always have the right of direct access to God. So how do we lose that direct access to God then? Or do we still have it? Does that change as we become adults?
I think we always have direct access to God. The question from in my mind is, do I still have my angel?
So what does that angel do?
I think Bernie can speak to that with his Catholic background. And no, I don't mean that as a joke. I mean,
No, we
my
do.
perception of our faith versus a Catholic faith is that you don't have to have all these intermediaries.
No, that's true, Bud. Yeah, by angel, I guess you could say the Catholic kind of expanded that in great form. But as I was thinking about that too, the angel that they're referencing, again, I look at this whole chapter more about the person who is receiving the child, and the angel that they're referencing is somebody who intercedes for the child potentially.
Excuse me, everybody. I'm going to mute myself because Susan's getting set up to Zoom church.
Okay.
But anyway, that's how, yeah, again, I'm looking at the angel, more like a guardian angel that intercedes.
Sarah, in your case, it sabotages U-Haul trucks.
Yeah, it does. Those of y'all that don't remember the story, when I graduated from college, I had exactly enough money to rent the smallest U-Haul truck they had, and took a couple of my male friends to go get the truck. And I looked at it and thought, not big enough, because I owned a small home and it was furnished. And the guy next to me is going, your stuff's not going to fit. And the other friend is driving the U-Haul to my house, and he's going real slow down the road, and he stops and gets out and comes back to us in the car and says, I can't get it out of first gear. We've got to go back to the U-Haul rental place. So we go back to the rental place because I had said a prayer. I saw the size of that. I said a prayer and said, oh, please God, let this be big enough. And so we go back to the rental place, and they take it out on the road, and their guy can't get it out of first gear either. And they said, well, we're sorry, some apology, but we have to give you the next biggest size. We don't have another one this size. We have to give you the next bigger size, and you don't pay any extra for it. And I bet everything I've got that U-Haul truck worked the next morning.
Sounds like it to me too.
That sounds like a story about fish and bread in the Bible. Wasn't there 5 fish? There you go. It sounds very familiar.
Yeah, but I've got another story that is most definitely angelic intervention, and I'll get a little weepy when I tell this story. This happened to my sister. She didn't learn how to drive until she was 18 or 19. I mean, she was married. And so she's driving to West Virginia to take her very small children, one of whom was probably still an infant, to visit their grandparents on the other side. And she didn't have any experience with how you drive real fast, and when you get off the road, you've lost perception of how fast you're going. So as you slow down, you're still going faster than you should be. So she's on these West Virginia roads, and it's real windy, and she realizes she's lost control of the car and she's about to die. And so she didn't want to watch it, so she takes her hands off the wheel and covers her face and waits to die. And nothing happened. So she opens her eyes, and the car is driving itself on these windy roads.
Oh my,
Yeah.
oh my.
So she has no doubt, I have no doubt, And I don't know if it was one of the baby's angels or if it was her angel, but there was angelic intervention that day, and that's why I still have my sister and my 2 nieces.
There's one of the old lieutenants that I worked with when he was a trooper worked a truck accident where the guy was coming down one of the mountains and burned out his brakes and had no brakes as it was coming down the mountain. And he was trying to make it to one of those little sand pits where, you know, that'll slow you down. And he didn't make it. He had a woman and her 2-year-old daughter in the truck with him, and they went down the side of the mountain. I think it killed both of them. And when the trooper rolled up, the little 2-year-old was sitting in the sand pit, and he asked her, "How did you get there?" And she says, "The man reached in the window and pulled me out."
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah, those kinds of stories are always powerful. Yeah. All right. So just kind of pull together this, Barclay makes the point that in every child there are infinite possibilities for good or ill. So it is the supreme responsibility of the parent, teacher, of the church to see that the dynamic possibilities for good are fulfilled. To stifle them, to leave them untapped, to twist them into evil powers is sin. So now to move to verses 8 and 9, which Barclay pulls out. And he's done this several other times. He's sort of rearranged the verses. So anyhow, Sarah, would you read this next passage on 2:11?
Sure. If your hand or your foot proves a stumbling block to you, cut it off and throw it away from you. It is the fine thing for you to enter into life maimed or lame, rather than to be cast into everlasting fire with 2 hands or 2 feet. And if your eye proves a stumbling block to you, pluck it out and throw it away from you. It is a fine thing for you to enter into life with 1 eye, rather than to be cast into the Gehenna of Fire with 2 eyes.
Okay. So we're looking at, the sequence in other Bibles. Jesus talks about receiving a child in his name, not being a stumbling block to them. And then it would go into these 2 verses about your own sin. And then that if you do not look down upon one of these little ones, for I tell you, their angel in heaven always looks upon the face of my Father who is in heaven. All right, so getting back to these 2 verses specifically, does this, I know we're familiar with these, but does it sound familiar to you otherwise? Does anybody have their Bible nearby?
Yeah.
Okay, look up Matthew 5:30, Bernie, chapter 5, verse 30.
Kathy, while he's looking, when they refer to specific body parts, are they referring to people in a community, with a community being the body?
Well, that's one of the points that the Barclay makes, is this instruction to the church.
I've got it.
Okay, all right.
And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell.
Yeah. So Matthew has referred to this teaching, has used this teaching before from Jesus. So, all right. So Barclay gets into talking about what Judaism's theology was at that time about hell. That there's that the word everlasting, that then to be cast into everlasting fire. So that word everlasting in the Greek is aionios, and it literally means belonging to the ages, is what the literal meaning of the word means. but it's used oftentimes in conjunction with punishment, the Jewish ideas of punishment, eternal judgment, judgment forever, punishment and torture forever, the fire which burns forever, and an everlasting prison, an eternal curse. The book of Baruch, which is in the Apocrypha, which we did several years ago, says that there will be no opportunity of returning, nor a limit to the times. So a punishment that's never ending. And then in that last phrase, that it is the fine thing for you to enter into life with one eye, rather than to be cast into the Gehenna of fire. Other translations say the hell of fire. So Gehenna itself was a valley, was in the valley of Hinnom, which is below, you remember Jerusalem is on a mountain. And so Gehenna is in the valley below it. And it was a place where Jews had sacrificed. Then there was a renegade time where there were some Jews that had sacrificed children to the fire and to the pagan god Moloch. King Josiah had made it a place, had made it an accursed place. And then in later times, getting closer to times of Jesus, it had become the refuse dump. That's where all the trash went, and kind of a vast incinerator. So it's thought that there was just this ongoing fire burning in Gehenna. So, so in this verse, Barclay is saying that God's punishment, as described in here, is for those who are useless, who make no contribution to life, for those who hold life back instead of urging life on. And so again and again, the New Testament teaching that uselessness invites disaster. So this area of land that was useless except for as a dump and had this eternal fire going, I mean, that sounds like the imagery that we kind of grew up with as far as what hell is. You know, the old cartoon images still about hell.
Is this set of passages, is that the theological underpinnings justifying excommunicating people from a church?
Ooh. I don't know. That would be something to look up, the history of excommunication. Yeah. All right. And Barclay does make the point that in any person and in any church, anything that is a seduction to sin must be removed, however painful the removal may be. So if we allow it to flourish, a worse punishment will follow. And in this passage, there may well be stressed both the necessity of self-renunciation for the Christian individual and discipline for the Christian church. And I think your point, Nancy, it's something we have to be ever mindful of, and we all can think of examples in recent years, you know, where folks representing Christianity in some way or another, that their work or their lives have gotten very distorted and seemingly moved away from the core Christian values. So Jesus talks about all this, is teaching about all this, and we go into this next passage. And I'll read it. This is verses 12 through 14 to take us to a different kind of tone. So what do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 and go out to the hills? And will he not seek the wandering one? And if he finds it, this is the truth I tell you, He rejoices more over it than over the 99 who never wandered away. So it is not the will of your Father that one of these little ones should perish.
Okay, this is the king of mixed messaging here. Okay, anything that's bad, throw it out and then go look for it and bring it back. I just. Oh, and when you add to this, don't judge, then you couldn't discern what was bad to throw it out to begin with. So, oh dear.
Here I am thinking out the hope and the love and forgiveness that's available. And Nancy's like, go get it. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, really, you get rid of it if it's bad, if it's evil, if it's temptation. But then at that point, that becomes a lost sheep that you need to kind of fix and bring back to the fold.
And celebrate that you found it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So we're not condemned to that Gehenna of Fire, you know?
Well, I think he's referring to the children aren't condemned to the Gehenna of Fire. He's interchangeably using sheep and children here, I think.
Yeah, that last verse. So it is not the will of your Father that one of these little ones should perish.
Yeah.
If we make the change, if we transform, you know, to know that we're not lost, you know, we're not going to be abandoned. Right? Yeah, I remember doing this story in Worship and Wonder, and I always enjoyed it. Just the power of this story, you know. So to talk a little bit about sheep herding and shepherds to sort of deepen our understanding of this, that in those times, flocks of the sheep were often communal flocks. They belonged to the community. So, so it sounds like there's just one shepherd, but Barclay is saying there may have been probably two or three out there. So for one to go off and find that lost sheep didn't leave the rest of the sheep by themselves necessarily. And then also the terrain that it was, you know, this sort of flat plateau, but the edges, you know, were pretty steep and you fall off those edges. So so it wouldn't take much for somebody to get lost and wander off to, you know, it reminds me sort of like the images of the Southwest. I haven't been there since I was a baby, but those of you that have, you know, it seems like you have to be careful because they're, you know, those flat plateaus. So
Tom and I have been watching a news show, and I think this is came out of England, so I'm assuming BBC, called Clarkson's Farm. And they've only done 8 episodes, and this guy that has more money than he does good sense decided to retire from a fairly dangerous career and go into farming. And so one episode was on sheeping. And he decided to, and he knows nothing about farming, and he keeps having these brilliant ideas, at least they're brilliant to him, and going off and doing them without any research, and they turn into extremely expensive disasters. The sheep were such a disaster because he's going after one and the other, the flock, and this is what I'm seeing in my mind, they all go in the other direction, and he thinks he can get in front of them and guide them somewhere. They run faster than he does and go in the wrong direction again. So we may be seeing this on Prime, I'm not sure. But Clarkson's Farm, I think it's the second episode on sheeping, and it illustrates this perfectly. Sheep have no sense. Wherever the guy in front goes, the sheep in front, there they go with him. So yeah, I have no doubt that there's another shepherd keeping the other 99 from falling off the cliff on the other side of the pasture.
So how does that episode end?
He has to repair a lot of fencing. And he finally has sense enough to go hire a shepherd. They have professional shepherds in England who will come around with their sheepdogs that have been well trained, and they will shepherd your sheep when you need a shepherd. And once they're in a fenced-in area, they can go shepherd somebody else's sheep. And then there's another episode where they bring in some rams and get everybody pregnant. And so the sheep continue throughout the show. It's only 8 episodes, and it's a documentary series. And I laugh myself silly in almost every episode because this guy is so stupid. He just has a lot of money.
So this is a true story?
This is a true story. And it was done fairly recently because he's dealing with COVID issues.
Oh my gosh.
So Clarkson
It's a
saw
true story, but I think, it's ironic that there just happens to be a camera person there at every one of these episodes.
I mean, he is doing
It is funny.
But yeah, it is funny, but also somewhat educational too.
So that sort of extends the analogy of the sheep.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not real smart animals.
Well, sometimes I wonder about human beings.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. That we all need a shepherd. No. We all need a shepherd that teaches us and guides us and leads us and protects us. Sometimes from ourselves, oftentimes from ourselves.
Isn't that one of the names that's given to Jesus, the Good Shepherd?
To Jesus and the Lord. Yep. And the the symbol of the shepherd's crook. I mean, the Episcopal Church, their, I don't know if you'd call it logo or whatever, but it is the shepherd's hook and a sheep. So that's their, of course it's drawn very formally and stuff, but yeah, it is. So, Barclay makes some points that this parable is teaching us about many things about love, that the love of God is an individual love. The love of God is a patient love. And he makes the point that sheep are proverbially foolish creatures. The love of God is a seeking love, that the shepherd wasn't content to wait for the sheep to come back. The love of God is a rejoicing love, and that the love of God is a protecting love. It's a love which seeks and saves. There can be a love which ruins, there can be a love which softens, but the love of God is a protecting love which saves people for the service of others, a love which makes the wanderer wise, the weak strong, the sinner pure, the captives of sin, the free men and women of holiness, and those vanquished by temptation, its conquerors. So I think that's a good note for us to end on today. Amen.